Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Man Amongst Men podcast.
One of the things you will hear Brian and I say over and over again on this podcast is that a man amongst men creates environments where he and those around him can thrive. And yet there are too many guys out there, when the going gets tough, collapse under the mental and emotional pressures of the lives that they're living. And guys collapse in very different ways. Some guys can go and drink too much, eat too much. In my case, it was sexting too much or too much pornography or too much masturbation. There's guys who just dive into workaholism. They collapse. They run away from the most emotionally and mentally stressful situations of their lives. And when they do that, fellas, there's no way that those guys can become man amongst men. So today is a very specific episode on how to, with 5 specific practices, how to build your mental and emotional toughness. And when I say toughness, what I really mean is your mental and emotional capacity to deal with the biggest challenges in your life without medicating, without numbing, without gritting your teeth and running away from it, but actually standing in your power because you have trained. Think of it as what the Navy SEALs do when they go through Hell Week. They are training for the worst possible conditions so that when they get out into the battlefield, nothing that is presented to them could possibly be any worse than what they've done in their training. They are ready to handle the mission. That's why they are the baddest ass men on the planet that are entrusted with some of the most difficult things that humanity's ever had to face. So here you have it today, 5 practices which you can use to build your mental and emotional toughness. And you can download this list with all the hyperlinks that we're going to reference throughout the entire podcast at doinnerwork.com/5 practices. So Brian, as you know all too well, over the last year and a half, I've been dealing with a person in my life who I care about deeply. She needs to remain nameless, who's dealing with a chronic illness that is very serious that could end up with her losing her life. Over the past 18 months, there have been a series of disappointments. There have been a series of dead ends, bad decisions, irrational behavior, times where I felt like I've provided guidance and experts on a silver platter that if this person were only to take that guidance, that her health would improve, and it's been rejected. And I felt the sense of helplessness many times and wanted to react in a way that was emotionally explosive. I wanted to throw my hands up in the air and say, fuck it, do it the way that you want, and withdraw completely from the situation. I've wanted to go back down some of my older, darker paths of numbing out, like through pornography, masturbation, sexting women. And what I found amazing amidst that entire storm that continues to persist is that I didn't go down any of those old traditional patterns of mine. I didn't explode emotionally. I didn't collapse or withdraw. I didn't go to the numbing route. And what that taught me, and what I'm continuing to learn about myself, is that my regular practices of building my mental and emotional capacity have allowed me to hang in and support one of the most important people in my life from a place of power, from a place of integrity, from a place of resourcefulness, the highest version. And I continue to be, in this particular person's life, the bedrock, the foundation of emotional and mental support, even when part of my stuff is being rejected. And I feel so strongly about the training that I've done over the past 10 years around building my mental and emotional capacity to hang in for the most important person in my life that I wanted to share 5 practices today that every man could use to build their mental and emotional toughness.
And what I'm not hearing, Dom, is with all this work that you've done over the decade of work that you've done it's not that you're not feeling these things anymore. It's not that you're not triggered by...
Oh, I'm triggered.
You're triggered, right.
I'm feeling them.
I'm in the same men's group as you. Like, I know what has come through this.
Yeah.
But it sounds like also that there's a different outcome now. There's the tools that you've used to create, to stay in it. But it's not this blissful experience that you now no longer is affecting you?
You bring up a good point, man. Through the work of the last 10 years, doing the inner work, I actually feel this stuff even more than I would have beforehand because I would have been numbed out or because I was blocked from my emotions. So the pain actually is much more acute. I can feel it as a result of it. And yet at the same time, feeling that pain and not reacting from a place of fear, not reacting from a place of wanting to stuff that pain away, but to feel it and use it as motivation to stand in a place of even greater power and resourcefulness. We actually are making some really tremendous headway and progress. It has required, though, a capacity, an emotional and mental capacity, and an endurance that I never would have had 5 years ago if I had not gone through this regular training of these practices we're going to share with you.
It sounds like the elevated pain allowed you to notice something more. It's like, oh, wow, I felt this more. This is really painful. And it sucks. Yes, it is painful, but I can also deal with it.
No question. Our listeners, you guys who are listening, you are playing big games in your life, right? You're responsible for a lot at work. Maybe you're running your own business. Maybe you're running a large team. Stressful situations at work. Chances are you have other people that you're responsible for in your life as well, whether it's maybe your partner or your kids or whoever else. Maybe you're leading communities, wherever you are. You want it that way. You like it that way. You like the responsibility. And yet at the same time, every single one of you have tipped over that point of where your emotional and mental capacity has been built. And as a coach, I have a chance to see this in the high performers that come to me. And I can see the series of ways that men collapse when they've tipped past their emotional and mental capacity. And so some of those responses, some of those ways of dealing with tipping past are, and you could blanket it under the one term of collapsing. And collapsing can come in the form of numbing out, like I used to do with porn and masturbation, sexting women, but numbing can come in overeating or drinking or gambling or Xboxing or workaholism.
The eating one for me, big time. I'll go through a stress. I'll run a workshop. And at the end of it, for some reason, I want to reward myself with a whole bunch of cookies. I had to recognize, wait a second. What if I didn't?
Yeah. If you don't know Brian, Brian is the cookie monster.
Right,
yeah.
Right. He's not only my favorite character, but also I like to embody his characteristics. But where I've gotten to more recently is, okay, this is what my body's asking of me. What if my capacity was a little bit more to just feel into this? Like whatever it is right now, what if I didn't do that activity to numb it, to avoid it, to shut down?
Yeah.
And the word that you keep using, Dom, that I want to reiterate, because this is what I put in my head when I'm thinking about these things and trying to not eat cookies, is the capacity.
Yeah, it's a capacity.
What is my capacity to take on more of this? And what's on the other side when I do?
That's the $1 million question. It's like, why should I give a shit about building my mental and emotional capacity? Well, because you are playing these big games in your life, because you want to continue to scale mountains and slay dragons and test yourself. Brian and I will continue to test you. We're going to put forward these challenges in front of you. And so as you're learning about yourself, what you're going to find is you're going to be frustrated. You're going to find the voice in your head is going to trigger you. You're going to want to collapse in some way, shape, or form. And by expanding your emotional capacity, the very things that would trigger someone else, a lesser man, to give up, to explode, to throw his hands up in disgust, and to leave the situation, for you, as you build your capacity, it'll be just like a little thing that you could brush off your shoulder.
Not even an issue.
It could become a non-event. Now, some of life's bigger events, like the one that I started with, where, I'm talking about someone's life that I care about, I still feel that thing. It's not like I brushed that off my shoulders, but this thing that has required a lot of my mental and emotional and spiritual energy over the last year and a half, I've been able to show up 100%, maybe not all the time, but most times 100% for that person. And my business hasn't suffered. My health hasn't suffered. My relationships with my friends haven't suffered. It hasn't been at the expense of anything else. It's actually helped to lift all of those other areas. So the why this matters, why you need to train to build your mental and emotional capacity is because you want to play bigger games, and life is going to throw fucking things at you. It's going to stress you out, things you didn't plan for, things you didn't want to have happened, unexpected illnesses, right? Those things will happen. And if you've built your capacity, nothing can shake you. That's what we want to get you at.
It becomes a game of efficiency. There was a study done at Harvard on happiness. What they found in the study is that life actually doesn't get any easier. The same things that we do are still hard. We happen to get better at them.
Yeah.
The really simple physical example is riding a bike. The actual physics of riding a bike doesn't get any easier after the first time you try and you fall off, but you get better at it. And it becomes efficient and you become faster and you get to places faster. And what we're talking about here on the emotional side, on the mental side, is the exact same thing.
Yep.
So what are the challenges that are created in our lives that we can actually push through as opposed to falling apart, numbing out, avoiding?
Yeah, let's imagine a few scenarios before we get in. So to make this even more tactical for you or practical for you, and then we'll get into the exercises. Imagine you're not self-employed, you work for an employer. Imagine you lose your job. Some people spiral off their axis. It devastates them and they become useless for a period of time because it's like it rocks your fucking world. Other people who have built their capacity for that, it's like, okay, I'm going to go out and find the next thing. A minor speed bump, a minor inconvenience on the road to life. Another example, this is one that we're really passionate about, is in the relationship with your woman. A lot of guys come to us, and Brian's smiling over here because Brian has recent examples. Like, so it's funny. I've been single for a while. Brian's been in relationships for the past, year and a half now?
Yes.
Yeah, with a little bit of a gap in between, right? So
small gap, big gap.
You've been training more specifically than I have recently, but I'm no stranger to finding myself with a partner who goes, "Hey, Dominic, let's talk about our relationship." And it's usually something that I've done that she wants to confront, right?
Those are the words you don't want to hear.
Right. And like most guys' initial reaction is like, fuck, how do I make this go away as fast as possible?
I like to call it like pulling the emotional ripcord.
Yes.
I need to fix this. I need to get out of it. I need to end this pain that's happening right now. That's not actually what I'm saying in my mind, but that's what I'm feeling and doing.
Yeah, there's a book called The Female Brain by Dr. Luann Brizendine. I've mentioned it a few times on this podcast. And she also has written a book called The Male Brain. I haven't read that one yet, but she references it. And she says in the book, The Female Brain, the male brain experiences pain when it witnesses pain, emotional pain on someone else. And it becomes so painful that men need it to end. And now that's just the initial reaction. That's just like the brain's automatic reaction.
That's
if you don't train, that's the trigger. So oftentimes we either try and solve the problem or fix it. And when we realize oftentimes in our partner, we can't fix it. She doesn't want it to be fixed. She wants you to listen to it. We become consumed with that pain and that helplessness that we want it to shut down.
It's actually harder for a guy to do nothing in that moment than to solve the problem.
Yes, correct. If you haven't trained for it, right? And I know a couple of guys, I'm coaching a few guys right now who's like, oh, well, I can sit there when my, let's say, girlfriend is complaining about the way I did X, Y, Z. I can sit there and I can listen to it. I'm like, yeah, but are you engaged or are you completely shut down inside?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Are you actually avoiding it, but they're in body?
He's like, no, I'm just waiting for it to be over. I'm like, okay, you're gritting your teeth. You're resenting every part of it. And here's
hunkering down.
I've been there too. Yeah. You know what I mean? But what happens is when you walk away from that, first of all, you're not in your power. So you've totally relinquished your power. We're against that. We believe you should be in your power. When you leave that situation, you're disconnected from your woman. And also, you're tired. Your energy is drained.
Big time. Zapped.
And what you'll probably do to get it back is something that provides a temporary jolt of energy, like beating off or like eating sugar or caffeinating or diving back into workaholism, none of which are really healthy ways of dealing with the situation. We're trying to get you to hang in with that discomfort in a way that feels powerful and resourceful for you.
And knowing that there's a benefit on the other side of it, that there's a learning and there's a growth.
Yeah.
Because here's what happens. When we get to a point, whether it's a conversation with our loved one, like the situation you're in, Dominic, or for me with my girlfriend, if I get to a point and I check out, if I get to a point and I decide to avoid it, inevitably, in the future,
yes,
I'm going to come back to that point. And that lesson is going to try to get taught to me over and over again. And that's a stagnant life.
Yeah, let's hit that. That's really important. Here's where you know you have ceased growing, is when you face the recurring issue of, here's the same situation with my girlfriend. Here's the same situation with my wife. I still get triggered by the same person at work when they do that thing. If that keeps repeating itself, then you're not becoming more efficient in this. You are not growing your mental and emotional capacity. How you know you're growing is when that ceases to occur anymore. Like you've solved that one thing that was recurring. Now you're going to have a new set of fucking problems. The game then is like, how do you navigate through that? The problems will become better. Mark Manson writes about that in The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. He's like, if you think you are supposed to have a life without problems, then you're going to be in a lot of pain. But if you can recognize the quality of your problems is a good indicator of how well you're doing in your life. And what we're talking about is you expand your mental and emotional capacity, the quality of your problems elevates quite a bit.
That's an exciting life.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it. So we can wait for life to throw shit storms at us and shit sandwiches that we have to eat, or we can actually do this on our own. We can train for it by our own intentionality. And because we're big proponents of designing your own life, we're going to go with I think the latter, which is designing these experiments on your own.
I equate this to, like, let's just say a basketball player, right? I feel like we're in a good sports mode right now. For basketball players, we can go play the game and train our athletic ability during the game. Or before the game starts, the days before the game, we can train our physical bodies so that we're better during the game.
Right on.
And that's what we're talking about here.
Yep, right on. And what we've been talking about is this mental and emotional training ground, right? Building your capacity for mental and emotional energy and capacity. What Brian and I are going to be doing is sharing with you physical examples, physical exercises, using our physicality to help you to expand that mental and emotional capacity.
That's cool, because for some reason that sounds less painful to me. I'm like, okay, I can do the body. It won't be. Okay.
It won't be.
I spoke way too soon.
Yeah. Spoiler alert, it won't be.
Yeah. Something that drives me crazy, I'll see this on Facebook all the time, and even in some of the circles that we run in this personal development space, or coaches, right? You got to endure the pain. Put more pain in your life. Like, take fire ants and throw them down your pants and see how long you can hang in there. Or
surprisingly, that's one of the exercises.
No, I hope not. I'm leaving this podcast if that's one of them. It drives me a little bit crazy because I'm like, well, wait a second. Like, is it really better to always live in pain? Yeah. I don't really get this. And so something I want to talk about here is, at what point does this become an additive, a capacity building thing, versus when is this thing that's just causing pain to cause pain?
Right.
And so the exercises that you're going to introduce are designed specifically to give us a moment in time to train. Just like the basketball player in the gym lifting weights, they lift weights for 45 minutes to an hour, because after that, there's limiting returns. It's not good for our body anymore.
Yes.
This is the same thing.
All right. Training ground number 1 is the breath hold challenge. So you and I have been doing breath work in the mornings. We've talked about that in the 11 Ideas for Your Morning Routine podcast.
I get made fun of by my friends a lot for doing breath work.
Do you?
I do. If I'm staying at someone's house for vacation and they hear me doing breath work, like, what was going on? That was a really strong masturbation session. I'm like, it wasn't masturbation. It was breath work. Yeah.
Breathing really loud. Yeah. Breath work can be disruptive to other people, but I think you and I have both talked ad nauseum about the benefits of it, activating the oxygen in your body, getting yourself ready to go, clearing yourself of toxins. But this particular exercise, and before I continue here, I want to remind you that you can download all 5 of these practices with hyperlinks to ways and how to do this at doinnerwork.com/5 practices. doinnerwork.com/5 practices. And the 5 is just the number 5, not spelled out. 5 practices. Okay. So the breath hold challenge. One of the fastest ways that you can get a sense for your fight or flight mechanism is holding your breath. The very thing that keeps us alive is breathing. You don't have to really focus on that. It just happens automatically for you. But some of the greatest practitioners in the world, like a Wim Hof, who we follow, he's called the Iceman. He's been able to use breath work to regulate his body chemistry and his heat to go into Arctic conditions. And one of the things that he likes to do with his breath work is to train overriding this panic button that our body regularly activates unconsciously. A disclaimer here is, if you're going to be doing breathing practices, you need to do it responsibly. If you're going to be holding your breath, you never want to be holding your breath in water, in a shower, in a bathtub, ever. Like, you want to be doing this on places like couches where, like, you can do this responsibly.
These are the things I wish we didn't have to say, but we do.
We do. Yes, I know. We do have to say these things. And I'm going to point you to a resource where you can learn how to do this. Follow those instructions. But when you hold your breath, And the way that Brian and I do it is we take 30 deep breaths in and out, in through the nose, out through the mouth. So it sounds like.
And then it sounds like nothing because you're holding your breath.
What's that?
Then it
sounds like nothing. Then it sounds like. And you drop the oxygen like all the way down into your belly and you hold it as long as you can. Now, what's going to happen is for a period of time, it's going to feel really peaceful and calm. Then what will happen is you'll feel a little surge of panic come up that's going to say, breathe. And if you're not ready for that, you'll kick out right away and you'll take a breath. But by anticipating it and recognizing that you can hang in a little bit longer, when that first panic thing comes up and you're just like, not right now, you can use your conscious mind to say, not right now, to your fight or flight mechanism. It actually dissipates for a little while and you find you have a few more seconds on the other side. Another panic will come up and then you could say, not right now. And on the other side, there will be more. Over time, like you'll find that maybe the first time you hold your breath, it's only 30 seconds. You can increase your breath hold to a minute and a half, 2 minutes within the period of a week and maybe even longer just by sitting in that discomfort and recognizing that you're okay. How this matters in the real world is oftentimes we find ourselves in a panic situation and we release our breath.
Physically, we release our breath?
No, that metaphorically, you release your breath, right? So it's like if you're standing in front of an audience full of people and you're giving a presentation and the projector goes out, your slides are done, and now you have to do the presentation extemporaneously. Triggered panic moment. If like you release your breath in that moment, the metaphorical release your breath, you could be doing the entire rest of your presentation from a place of fear.
Spiraled out of control.
Brian, if your girlfriend comes to you and she says something that's like right between the eyes about some way that you've shown up, that's like she doesn't feel like you've been the man that she's looking for, if you panic in that moment and you let that breath go, metaphorically, you defend, right? Versus absorbing that in the moment and then saying, can I hang in here a little bit longer? Training your breath in that respect will allow you to hang in those situations without reacting or collapsing. So the resource here that we're going to have hyperlinked in the free download at doinnerwork.com/5 practices is a man by the name of Stig Severinsen. He has a 7-day breath hold challenge. You can Google him now. It's Stig Severinsen 7-day breath hold challenge. And he will teach you the specifics of how to hold your breath, different ways to play with your diaphragm, how to handle that fight or flight mechanism. And he's even got a Facebook group where people can upload, hey, here was my first breath hold, 30 seconds. Here's my second, a minute and a half. Oh my gosh, I'm up to 2 minutes plus. And by using some of these techniques, I've gotten myself at times over 3 minutes in holding my breath.
And I want to reiterate, Dominic, that trigger that we feel, that initial one that says, breathe, that's the point we want to notice. And not to be grotesque here, but it's a similar feeling to when you have to poop. And you're like, oh my God, I got to go right now. But then, of course, you're not near a bathroom. And so you hold it.
Yeah.
And then it usually, not all the time, but usually goes away for a little while. And then eventually
and it will always return. Yeah.
It'll always return.
Hopefully,
right? Yeah. Let's get some major
If it disappears,
issues.
That's amazing. I don't know. Like, tell me how that works.
Try to go anyways if that happens. But like then eventually you go to the bathroom. So like that initial like we're going to feel that. When for the breath work, we're going to feel that. Notice it and know that you're okay.
I do this every morning. I do 2 rounds of 30 intense breaths and I hold. And I find myself in the situation now where maybe even we'll videotape this, but like my body will be convulsing because like physiologically, my body will be like, okay, it's time to breathe, it's time to breathe, time to breathe. And I'll feel the fear and my whole body will be shaking because it's like, take a breath. And I can hang in with that for sometimes between 15 to 30 seconds of convulsing before I got to bring the breath in. David Blaine, who's a magician, also I think set a world record for like 18 minutes of breath hold. 18 minutes he trained, like he trained over a 6-month period. And if you hold your breath too long, there can be problems like, dementia in the brain, or you could lose like feeling in certain parts of your body. But the fact of the matter is, like where we are, like you won't be able to get nearly that far.
Yeah.
So you don't have to like worry about that.
Dominic, an exercise, and this is not one we're recommending here, but this is something that Dominic and I had an opportunity to do in Jamaica at an event called A-Fest.
We're moving into number 2 now.
Oh, we are?
Yes.
Okay.
Practice number 2. So let me hit that one on.
Oh, yes.
Practice number 2 are daily cold showers. The Arctic splash of turning your faucet to as cold as you possibly can and dealing with that boom, polarizing, terrifying feeling of my whole body has just been shook.
Yeah, at breath work, I was like, cool, I can totally do that. I can sit on my bed. I can hold my breath. I can feel the trigger. And then you hit me with cold water. I'm like, hey, that might be a little too much, maybe a little bit too much for me. Popularized by Wim Hof, the Iceman that Dominic already mentioned. And the story I was going to tell is Dominic and I were at A-Fest, an event that was held down in Jamaica. We met Wim Hof, and he took the entire group through this ice bath challenge. They filled up an entire hot tub, ironically, with, I don't know, literally a ton of ice.
Yeah.
And they put enough water in there where you could sink into it easily.
The coldest thing I've ever experienced in my life.
It was brutal. The idea was you get in and you feel that initial surge. And that's the first trigger, the first feeling. And then it's like, okay, how long can you stay in it? And Wim Hof was there. He wasn't counting. He was singing Who Let the Dogs Out.
Yes, that's right. And he was also singing, fuck fear. Fuck fear.
Yes. And so the next part of it, after that initial trigger, was, okay, how long can we stay in it for?
Yep.
And he let us go, I believe, up to maybe 2 minutes.
A bath filled with ice.
Right. He did this for a reason. He brought us out after 2 minutes because none of us had trained for that for more than 2 minutes. 2 minutes was enough to feel the pain, to stay in it, and I felt very accomplished, very alive, very energetic afterwards. But Wim Hof knew if I stayed in it for 5, 10, 12 minutes, my legs would have gone numb. I could have lost fingers. I could have lost toes. Yeah. Because I wasn't trained for it. He did train for it.
Yeah. What you're talking about is discernment of pushing yourself through discomfort, putting yourself in discomfort's way to train to build your capacity, but not going past the point of what's healthy for you, right? Like an injury. So you were saying before we started this podcast, you're like, back in the day when I was training physically, I was in the gym, I was doing these jump squats with like heavy weights on my back. You're like, I felt the pain on my back. I was being a tough guy by fighting through that pain. And then I injured myself, and you need to have like back surgery at some point for that, right? That is an example of like where you haven't discerned what is healthy pain and what's pain that's pushing you towards injury. And what we're saying is through these practices where you are consciously designing them, that you'll actually become much more attuned to when you need to pause. I'll give you a specific example of that in my life and one of these future examples.
I think it's safe to say for this one with the cold water in the shower, like something I have to remind myself, because I really don't like cold water, is that I'm safe. I'm actually safe.
You're fine.
Like this is healthy. I'm safe.
The hardest part is withstanding the cold blast. And most people, again, don't anticipate that the worst part is the initial shock. The worst part's the initial shock. So if you can hang in with that initial shock and breathe through it, it actually subsides in the next few seconds. And maybe not the first time, but like regular exposure to that. And that's why we're going to recommend, if you Google Wim Hof cold shower challenge, he has a 30-day schedule. It's very simple. It's what I used. And I've been using like the cold showers for 9 months now, maybe even over a year now. Do 15 seconds at the end of your shower. Take a hot shower and then finish with 15 seconds of cold for the first week, then move it up to 30. Then move it
I
up to
find
45.
this a lot easier to do in the summertime.
It is way easier
where
in the summertime.
It's nice and warm out. Like, actually, the cold feels great. Doing this in the dead of winter,
it's a totally different ball game. So start now.
Even getting to the point where I'm going to change the dial to cold is that's a trigger for me.
One last story on this. I was at a retreat in Canyon Ranch in Massachusetts. It wasn't a retreat. It was just like a vacation. I took my mom on there for her Mother's Day. I was in the men's locker room area. They had a hot tub and a cold plunge. And so I was in the cold plunge for 5 minutes. And there was this older dude in the hot tub. He was like 65 something years old. And he looked at me when I got out of the cold plunge. He was like, how the hell did you stay in there for 5 minutes? I dipped my toes in and I have to come like jumping right out. And I explained this exact thing to him around the worst part is the initial blast. If you can anticipate it and give yourself a strategy to navigate that, and here's some breathing exercises to slow your breath down, chances are you'll be able to deal with it. At the end of the week, I'm packing up my bag or we're loading stuff into the car, and I hear this guy yelling, like running up behind me. He's like, Dominic, Dominic, Dominic. And it's the 65-year-old guy. He was like, guess what? I'm like, what do you got? He goes, I was in the cold plunge this morning for 5 minutes. He was able to do it, and he worked up through the course of the week to it, but he was able to do it.
So what you said is so important. when we're going through these experiences, when that older gentleman went through that experience, where we are at mentally is so important, because most of us, and most of the time I've done this, what I'm focusing on is the pain.
Yes.
I use breath to get my mind away from focusing on the pain.
Yes.
And that's where some of the magic is in all of these exercises.
And I also focus on why I'm doing this. Again, this is a training ground to make me more capable in life, to make me more energized, energy efficient, powerful. So I never lose sight of that. It's never just a cold shower. It's never just a breath hold.
Because on the outside, Dominic, looking at you from the outside, you just look like a really strange dude doing all this really weird shit. Yeah,
that's fine, man.
And I have to explain to all my friends, Dominic actually isn't that strange. There's a purpose behind all of it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good to lead into this next one, which is number 3 is the push-up challenge, the 100 push-up challenge. One of the pieces of feedback I often get when I show up at conferences where I'm speaking is someone will come up to me, they'll be like, hey, I heard you were speaking and I looked up on your website and I saw this 100 push-up challenge thing and I rolled my eyes because here's some bro-y guy doing 100 push-ups. But when I watch the YouTube video and I see the ticker tape at the bottom where I put like the reason why I'm doing it and how I train and what the purpose of the 100 push-up thing is, which is really to build your mental and emotional capacity, then people are like, whoa, this is not just a physical exercise. This is really about like learning what you're made of. And you've heard me share before, when I first decided to go after the 100 push-ups, it was because I was interested in going after something that I thought I could fail at. Because I was looking around kind of at most of the things I had been doing in my life at that point, maybe it was like 4 or 5 years ago. Everything I decided to take on, I pretty much knew I could succeed at because I didn't like the prospect of failure. So I played conservative games. This was one of those things that could potentially teach me. Maybe I wasn't capable of it. I went on 100pushups.com, which we've hyperlinked in the free download for you. And I found this 6-week training program, 6 weeks of training to get to 100 pushups. And at first, I did think it was mostly a physical challenge, but I recognized very quickly that it called on a lot of my mental and emotional capacities. Mentally, my mindset, when I would hit like 45 or 50 pushups, my mind would say, there's no fucking way you could do another 50. Like you've already drained 80 to 90% of your energy here and you still got halfway to go. There's no way. That was my mind. So I had to actually learn how to create a new story in my mind. Emotionally, the pain, my shoulders would inevitably around 35 to 45 push-ups would start to have like searing pain inside of them, or the band across my chest would start to like be in pain and I would want to collapse. I would want to run away from it. But through practicing it regularly and recognizing that was not the pain that was causing injury, it was just like pain from doing something strenuous, I was like, oh, here you are, pain. Here you are again.
And Dominic, I did this challenge with you because you did this in preparation for the first retreat that you ran several years ago. And for me, my mindset going into this was, oh, there's other guys that are going to do this challenge. We're all going to do it together. It's a test of physicality.
Yes.
And I did the same 6-week training that you did. I ended up getting to 78 push-ups. I didn't get to 100. And I was a bit pissed off about that.
78 is still badass, but yeah, and it's not.
It was a failure because my mindset going into it is like, can my body do this? That's the only thing that matters.
Yep.
I think if my why was different going into it, if my mentality was the same as yours going into it, that would have changed everything, even if I still got 78.
Right on. And I was actually being coached by John O'Connor at that time, right? So John's your coach right now, and he's an amazing men's coach. When I got to 80 push-ups, I told him that's where I really started to struggle, like right around the point where you were. John gave me this brilliant piece of advice. He was like, when you get to 80, you're probably going to be so consumed with your own pain. One of the best mechanisms for it is to attach it to something outside of your own pain. And he was like, when you get to 80, start to envision like 10 of the most important people of your life surrounding you in a circle, either cheering you on or them just getting deep inspiration from watching you push your edge. Each push-up that you do inspires them and lights them up because it's like, here's a guy who's willing to go for it. You know what I mean? Like who's on the battlefield, who's pushing it. And that really clicked for me. So when I got to 80 and, a lot of my reserves are and my body's shaking, all I started picturing was, there's my sister Mary. You know what I mean? Like who's proud of her brother. Now I would like you who'd be like, come on, Dom, like get this, like for us. My mom, like my clients being like, wow, if Dominic can do this, then I have no excuse to stop when I feel the pain. And then that is what got me out of my head, what got me out of my pain for those like final 20, 25 push-ups. That is training for it.
Now, where my mental head went at 78 was, oh, you're not good enough. You're not strong enough. Like, look, other people are doing it. It was all about me. It was about failure, and it was about physicalness.
Your mind sabotaged you.
Completely different.
Yep. Last thing I'll say on this one is during the 6-week training program, I ended up feeling a certain kind of pain that was not the healthy pain. It was like if I continue to push through this could be a chronic injury for a while. So I actually recognized that because I could discern, and I ended up stretching out my training to 3 months instead of 6 weeks. I ended up taking about 3 weeks off to let that recover. And I realized there was a problem with my form. And so when I fixed my form, I went back to it. No problems, no injuries, good to go.
And I feel like this happens all the time. I've worked out with several guys here in New York since the time I've been living here. I feel like inevitably when we start a training program, one of us gets hurt, it derails us. We have excuses to stop and pull back.
Yeah.
So it's an important piece to notice, where is that pain? Is this a good, healthy tension, the burning pain, or is it injury?
I think this is one of the most important points of our podcast here, attuning yourself and discerning what's like healthy pain and what's this pain that could push you to a point of rupture or injury. I mean, we're seeing dudes who are in CrossFit all the time going for that next big weight, and like they're injured all the fucking time. And if you do that in your emotional life, you could sit in a relationship for too long because you're like, you know what, I'm going to hang in there all the time and like just continue to eat the shit sandwiches that this other person is forcing down your throat. And maybe they're not doing any of the inner work, but you are. At a certain point, like you need to realize when you've tipped past the point of building capacity into just being a whipping boy.
And part of our finding our edge is exactly that, right? It's going to the edge. And sometimes we even tip a little bit over it, but recognizing
you have to
that,
sometimes. You have
stepping
to.
back.
Yeah.
Right. You have to sometimes. So in all of these exercises, it's okay. Like, let's go find that edge in the safe zone. If we tip over a little bit, okay, we know where we're at, just like you did in the push-up challenge.
Right on. All right. Number 4 is meditation, long duration, completely motionless. Now,
completely emotionless?
No, motionless, no movement.
No movement. Okay,
yeah.
Got it.
So
very different.
I suppose, well, let me first address our listeners who don't meditate at all. Just even the act of meditating could help you build your mental and emotional capacity, because if you resist meditating on some level, chances are like you're uncomfortable with the stillness. You're uncomfortable with what happens in your mind. I can't believe I'm not doing something productive. This is a waste of time. This is bullshit. Reacting to that and then springing back into the doing versus witnessing what's going on. That alone could be your practice. That alone, just like even stepping towards a meditation practice. Now, I want to speak to the people who have a regular meditation practice. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had is long form, completely motionless meditation. When I did my 10 days of silent meditation in Hawaii back in 2016, for the first few days, like they were building us up for, we want you to be ready for 1 hour sitting like cross-legged and you do not move whatsoever, which means when you sit down, if like you're sitting on an uneven surface and you want to like adjust your back, you can't do that. If you have an itch on your face, you can't scratch it. And it doesn't sound so bad until you sit motionless for an hour. Now, I was convinced that I was going to do this thing for an hour. I was committed for it. Within the first 3 minutes, I'd crossed my legs in the wrong way, and like my ankles and knees were screaming bloody murder within 3 minutes. And I'm like, wow.
This sounds absolutely miserable.
It was miserable.
I'm moving right now. This is, when you watch a movie and there's an underwater scene and somebody can't breathe.
Oh yeah.
And you're holding your breath, watching it at the same time.
You're feeling that now?
I'm feeling that right now, and I need to move.
I'm re-experiencing it right now. And I remember for the next 57 minutes, I went through the spectrum of dealing with that pain. First, it was, I'm going to distract myself from the pain. And that worked for a period of time until the pain became too intense and all encompassing where I couldn't ignore it anymore, which by the way is a microcosm for life. If you think about it, like we oftentimes, whenever I put someone through a trial that causes them pain, the number one strategy that people employ is distraction. I think about something else. And that works until you're in an environment where you can no longer distract yourself from
That's
it.
What you did to get from push-up 80 to get to push-up, I think 111 maybe that you did. Right? That's what you did. You distracted yourself.
To a degree, I did. To a degree, right.
So it does work to a certain extent.
To a certain extent. But like, for example, going back to where I started the conversation today about the last year and a half, someone's chronic illness, I can't distract myself from that. Maybe there are short-term moments where I can do that, but like ultimately this thing is not going away. I'm in it. I'm swimming in it for a while. And hopefully if this works out, like I'll be swimming in it to some degree for the next few decades if like we can get her health back on track. So this in the meditation moment, it was, okay, I tried the distraction. I brought myself back. Maybe that killed 10 minutes off the clock. I still had another 47 minutes to go. And then I started getting angry at the pain. And that anger actually exacerbated the pain. Why the fuck did I sit this way? Why am I in such pain? Why do my knees not have this kind of range of motion and flexibility? And like that became an exasperator of it. And then what was interesting, and I wish I could say I held this for the next like 35, 40 minutes. I was able at some point for short periods of time to detach myself from this pain and to like actually look at it as if it were separate from me.
Like you were a third party
witnessing
your body
like,
doing that.
Oh, that knee, which I know belongs to me on some level, but that knee is in a lot of pain right now. And when I was able to kind of like step back from that and witness it without layering on the anger or the resentment towards it, it actually made it much more easy to deal with. And there were like these long stretches where I was able to look at that pain. It was still there, but like not associate with it. And then I would fall back into it and then I would feel it fully and then I would get angry and I cycled through that back and forth. By the time the 60 minutes was up, I was able to maintain that commitment. I did not move at all. I could barely move my legs. I had to crawl outside of the tent that we were meditating in and I threw up in my mouth because of like how difficult that was. But that experience, Brian, taught me, and I did that before I did the 100 push-up challenge. That experience taught me that my capacity for pain is way bigger than I ever would have given it credit for. And that's why you see guys like Navy SEALs who can go through Hell Week with 7 days of very little sleep and just being bruised and battered. They can survive it. They train in the worst possible conditions. So then when it's time to go kill Osama bin Laden, that's like a walk in the park compared to the training they went through.
Yeah. Some people ask me like, well, your website's doinnerwork.com. Like, what is that? Like, what is inner work? And so if anybody wants to know what that is, what the story that Dominic just described is one really clear example of what doing inner work is. we can go outside and go run for 1,000 miles. We can do this, we can do that. But like, that's a great description of doing the inner work and why we do it.
That's it. The fifth and final exercise or practice that you can do is actually non-physical in nature. This one is called taking temporary abstinence periods. So you've probably heard us talk about this before if you've listened to this podcast before. Taking temporary abstinence from those things that you typically do to avoid or to numb or to escape, like watching Netflix, like drinking, like Brian's Cookie Monster examples, like pornography and masturbation. In some cases, maybe like dependency on caffeine or cigarettes. Or
sometimes I hit all three of those at the same time. It's very strange.
It's very easy to do that. To take a temporary abstinence period from those things that you're reliant upon to give you a greater sense of awareness of why you're so reliant upon those things. Simple example, 10 days off of Netflix, no television, no TV, no Netflix, no movies, no YouTube. And then seeing like those moments over the course of that week where you would naturally want to go there. Oh, I'm exhausted. I came home from work. I had a stressful day. I just want to disappear into. And when you don't have that, and then you're like, okay, well, now what do I do? And feeling that discomfort, but also asking like what TV, Netflix would have provided you in that moment. Instead of disappearing, now you've learned something about yourself. And you've also dealt with building the emotional capacity around the discomfort of not getting that initial salve.
You brought something up here that we haven't talked about in the other 4 exercises, but it's an important piece of all of these, and that's the reflection. For example, let's say that I took 30 days, or let's be realistic, 10 days, 10 days with no dessert, reflecting on how that made me feel. And I've done this recently, reflecting on how that makes me feel. And I do that through journaling.
Yeah.
Has been critical to continuing a behavior that I want to continue into the future past the 10 days.
Yes.
Because what I notice is like when I didn't eat those cookies, usually they're at night. Usually it's like while I'm watching Netflix. I ended up shutting Netflix off because I was done eating cookies already. I ended up going to bed earlier, and man, the next day I felt energized and I had really productive days. That all made me happier.
Yes.
And so part of the exercise is doing what Dominic's talking about, the 10 days abstinence challenge. But what comes after that it comes from the reflection of what that experience was for us.
Right on. What we're talking about here is creating space between the stimulus and response, right? You've heard us mention this quote, Viktor Frankl. In between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies your ability to make new choices. And those choices are what allow growth and freedom. But if like the stimulus and response are just conjoined with one another, stimulus, it's nighttime, response, Brian eats cookies. You just create this cycle, this constant cycle of, I feel maybe good in that moment, but then I get shit sleep and I feel crappy the next day. And then I have to perpetuate that cycle. It becomes more of the same. You're doing it over and over and over and over again. This temporary abstinence period creates a lot of space for you to be able to be like, oh, I got to interrupt that pattern. But when you go back, once that temporary abstinence period is over, now Brian has a choice. And like he may feel that urge to reach for the cookie. You may feel the urge to reach for that cookie. You now know there's that space there to say, if I do this, here's what's going to happen, the domino effect. Do I want that right now?
In that space, when I do notice it, my go-to is, there it is. I just take a breath, literally a breath, just and say, I have a choice. What do I want?
Yep.
Sometimes I want the cookie.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll have it, right? But like you've made the choice, right? Versus it just defaulting and then you drifting into just a decision that you didn't really make consciously. In the download, we're going to have a number of different examples of like temporary abstinence periods that you could do for yourself.
What are the ones that you've done?
100 days of no alcohol to start a new year. 50 days of no TV, no Netflix.
I'm curious on that first one, the 100 days of no alcohol. What was some of your reflections on that?
These were great, dude. I remember this was a few years ago when I hired a dating company to find me a bunch of dates.
Did you still have them?
No. Yeah, it was pretty cool. It's called virtual dating assistants. They outsource all of my dating life. Like they create the profile, they talk to all the women until it's time. Okay. Where the women are like, hey, we like you. Here's my phone number. Then I engage. It was great. Took a lot of this. Yeah. It was expensive, but it was great. When I would go on the dates and we would go to dinner or something like that, and they would want to drink, I'd be like, great, have a glass of wine. I'm not drinking. A lot of those cases, it created like a weird moment. It was like, oh, are you an alcoholic? Or, oh, well, if you're not going to drink, then I can't have a drink. And like, you're the wet blanket. And it was like, wow, how many of these experiences I found like I would have felt pressured into just doing it to diffuse that situation. And what I actually found, Brian, this is really interesting. I found that it was easier to stand on the, hey, I'm doing this thing for 100 days platform. But in that moment, I was like, if I just really didn't want a drink, and that was all it was. It wasn't like some tied to some magical 100-day thing. Would I have had the fortitude to say like, I just don't want one? Back then, no. But right now, having gone through this training, if I were going on a date with someone or if I were going on a business meeting and someone wants to have a drink and I don't feel like it, I could say, I don't want one. Why not? I'm just not in the mood for one. Don't let that stop you. And sometimes people like don't like that. It may break rapport for the moment, but like at least it's true to me. I can now do that. Back then, by the 100 days of doing this, I learned how many fucking situations I was drinking where I didn't want to. And now a few years later, I'm hardly ever drinking. Yeah.
You found situations where you were drinking that you didn't actually want to.
Most of them. Yeah.
And now you can go into those situations without the 100-day challenge and just say like, oh, I'm not because I don't want to.
Yeah, because I don't want to. There will always be eye rolls from certain people or like pushback. I expect it now and I'm good. It's like, okay, cool.
Two things come to me from that. One is your capacity has changed. Yep. Your capacity is more. And the capacity for some sort of social awkwardness.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say that social awkwardness makes you a little bit more interesting.
Of course.
It makes people question, like, well, what is it? You're alcoholic? No, well, you're not drinking? What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I know.
Right. Oh, well, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So you start to become really a light around some of the work that you're doing here by building that capacity.
Yeah. For some people, other people feel judged by it. I have zero judgment. Like, have your drinks, have a good time. But I know for me, it just doesn't agree with me the way that maybe it does with you. So go for it. Some people will feel judged. Other examples I did, well, this was when I went into Sex Addicts Anonymous. 4 years of no porn and no masturbation. I wouldn't recommend going that length of time, but even just trying 10 days of no porn, no masturbation will give you extraordinary insight as to like how dependent you most likely are on porn and masturbation to navigate your emotional internal situations.
And we did a whole podcast on this one where I took 10 days off and went through all those reflections as well. So check out that podcast if you want more on.
Yeah, that's called How to Take 10 Days Off of Masturbation and Why. We'll have a bunch of other examples of temporary abstinence periods. John O'Connor, again, the coach who's worked with me for 3 years and working with Brian now, once said, I don't really ever know why I'm doing something until I stop doing it for a little while. And so this is an opportunity for you to learn more about yourself. doinnerwork.com/5 practices. And we'd love to hear from you, like which of these practices you've taken on. I do these regularly. And again, the bottom line is if you can make your life a conscious training ground to build your mental and emotional capacity, then no matter what life throws at you, you can handle it with power, with integrity, with energy, with efficiency. I don't know where I'd be without it.
I was just thinking through what could a 30-day challenge be for me?
Yeah.
I think I've got it.
What do you got?
I'm ready. Starting September 1st. No Uber Eats. I'm like a once a day-ish Uber Eats kind of guy.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think 30 days will help change a lot of different behaviors where I have to get the groceries. I maybe learn how to cook new things. And there's no like I can then not do Uber Eats but do Seamless. Like this is no ordering.
Yeah. Okay.
For 30 days. We'll see how this goes.
And you should probably track how much money you save as a result of that.
It's ridiculous. Yeah.
We'll check back in your 30 days, man. Hey, thanks for listening to the Man Amongst Men podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you want more access to tools and resources, and you want information on our upcoming live events and retreats, head on over to www.doinnerwork.com.